1. I believe in love. This was the sentiment, ingenuous, idealistic, and honored by the good and the great throughout the ages, that wrecked poor little Ivy Vernon's high school days. For tout verite n'est pas bonne à dire. One might believe in love, though not with Ivy's capital L, needless to say, but one did not proclaim the belief aloud. After all, there were decencies to be observed. In any case, as a sixth-form girl remarked, dwelling on the academic rather than the ethical aspect of the lapse, what a loosely worded and altogether meaningless observation. Define love. Define belief. When you say you believe in something, do you mean that you acknowledge its existence to be a proven fact? How then do you believe in an emotion? These questions were rhetorical. They were not put to Ivy Vernon directly. Indeed, her remarkable pronouncement was received in a sudden silence compounded of shame, amusement, and contempt. It had been made, quite softly, in the course of a discussion on life, and fell horridly into the midst of many gallant sentiments relating to creative work, freedom, self-expression, and experience. All these things seemed very splendid and desirable to the young people who were so earnestly advocating them, and discussing them, and analyzing them into tiny little pieces. Most of them, beyond a doubt, had love in the back of their minds. The word was even spoken aloud, for they feared nothing, except perhaps one another, in suitably cold and impersonal accents. But to say, "I believe in love," no, no, no. That was a very different thing. From that day, little Ivy Vernon was branded. The literary set, temporarily forgetting the austerity of literary language, called her a sloppy little fool, and the athletic set, more simply, supposed that she was batty. The kinder and wiser amongst her contemporaries said that she was a thoroughly morbid and unwholesome little thing. What the less kind and wise said is unprintable. Ivy wandered through the remaining 2 years of her school life, slightly bewildered and lonely, but still believing in love. She did not fully understand the reason why she made no friends, because nobody liked to refer to anything so shame-making and altogether so extraordinary as her terrible proclamation of faith. Such things were better forgotten. After leaving school, Ivy, who was an orphan, found a job as assistant junior mistress at a big girls' school in the North Riding. She worked there for 5 years and was moderately contented. Sometimes it crossed her mind that to live entirely among women might tend to limit one's outlook, and very often she dreamed romantic dreams of the lover whom she would one day meet. The nearest approach to reality that the dream lover ever achieved was in the summer holidays, when Ivy usually stayed with her aunt, who competently ran a large boarding house called a private and residential hotel on the South Coast. There, young men cast approving glances at Ivy, who was slender and blonde and pretty, and took her out to dance, and frequently kissed her and swore that they would never forget her. Forget her they did, however, usually within a week of leaving the private and residential hotel. Ivy, sighing a little, continued to remember them, but without bitterness. She still believed in love, although it had not come to her. When Ivy was 28, she was invited by the aunt to come and live with her altogether. "You can be very useful to me," said the aunt with great truth, "and it'll be more of a life for you than spending your time amongst a lot of old maids." Ivy did not reply to this, as she might well have done, that Aunt May was herself an old maid. To live with one thoroughly active and practical unmarried woman running a boarding house by the sea is better than to live with 8 or 9 educated and learned unmarried women running a school for girls in the wilds of Yorkshire. "And," said the aunt impressively, "if you and me hit it off, as I think we shall, you'll find you've no reason to regret it later on. I've no one belonging to me but you, Ivy, and I don't suppose I'm going to live forever." The supposition, an eminently reasonable one, was justified, but not for some years. Ivy was 38 when the aunt died of pneumonia. She left Ivy the house, half an acre of land, and investments that brought in nearly £300 a year. "But what shall I do with it all?" said Ivy, with large, tearful eyes fixed upon the senior partner of her aunt's firm of solicitors. He advised her to put the house up for sale, and to leave the investments alone. "You might even go abroad, for a little while, later on," he suggested benevolently. "I think you told me that you had a little money of your own?" In the circumstances, I think I may say that you would be justified in taking a well-earned holiday, now that your future is comfortably provided for. A little later on, no doubt you will decide upon your future plans." In his own mind, he was rather dubiously wondering whether his client would be fool enough to let herself be married for her money. On the whole, he thought it improbable that anyone would try. She was such a faded, quiet little creature. Eventually, Ivy took his advice. She put the house into the agent's hands, withdrew the sum of £105 from the post office savings bank, and went to London to buy clothes and to visit a travel agency. The travel agency, as soon as it understood that she wanted sunshine, blue sea, and cheerful society, sent her on a Mediterranean cruise. 2. She was making friends. The people on the cruise seemed, as was inevitable, to fall naturally into groups. There was the very noisy set, mostly quite young, who drank a great deal and were supposed to engage in promiscuous affairs with one another. There was a smaller, quieter, and rather less young set, eager and ready for amusement, but always decorous and deriving a good deal of superior gratification from watching and discussing the strange behavior of the noisy ones. And there were those people, husbands with possessive wives, mothers with elderly daughters, and isolated maiden ladies, concerning whom the chief wonder was why they had elected to travel at all, since they did nothing except sit about in deck chairs, write picture postcards, and eat their way silently through gigantic meals. Ivy belonged naturally to the second group. She thought that she had never met so many pleasant people in her life before. Take the Maitlands. Mr. Maitland was a very well-to-do solicitor from Manchester. His wife, still under 50, was handsome, cheerful, and a great talker. She took a fancy to Ivy and told her all about her children at school, and what a good husband Don was, and what beautiful things he had given her, a fine car of her own, and a squirrel coat, and several pieces of really good jewelry. Don Maitland, in his silent way, also made it plain that he liked Ivy Vernon, and liked her to go about with them when they left the ship to go sightseeing. Sometimes they were joined by an intelligent schoolmistress, traveling by herself, called Vera Lord. They all liked her, but were a little bit afraid of her because she read up so diligently and knew so much about each place they visited. Then came the evening on which Ivy, to her astonishment, was asked to dance by the tall, dark young man who had been regarded as belonging exclusively to the other set. She accepted at once. Even if she had not wished to do so, she lacked savoir-faire to refuse, but she was secretly pleased and flattered at being asked. He was such a very dashing-looking young man. She had often noticed him because he was so tall, so dark, and had such an air of self-confidence. It had also seemed to her that he was less noisy and rowdy than some of his associates. Once or twice, too, he had looked at her as if he really saw her. Ivy, even at 20, had never been looked at really hard by strange men. She wasn't the type predestined to receive such attentions. Now, at 38, although actually she was better dressed than ever in her life before, men seldom gave her a second glance. Certainly, she had never expected to be singled out by McLawson. She knew his name. Why not? It was to be heard, frequently enough, on board. Where's McLawson? Isn't Mick coming up for a drink? Oh, come on. McLawson is making up a party to go ashore and have fun somewhere. Now she was dancing with McLawson. I should guess you do a lot of dancing, he said. You're not a pro by any chance? Oh no, said Ivy. I love it, but I've never had very much practice. She knew that she was a naturally good dancer, but she had never supposed herself to be anything like as good as his words seemed to imply. For a moment she wondered whether he could be laughing at her, and glanced up at him. He was quite serious. He had really meant it. Do you truly think I dance well? She hazarded. Marvelously. You're as light as a feather, and your sense of rhythm is absolutely perfect. But I hardly know any steps. That doesn't matter. You'd learn them in a minute. I'd like to show you one or two. He tried her with one or two simple variations, and Ivy, under his expert guidance, found that she was following quite easily. At the end of each dance she thought that he would leave her, but he stayed. At first they talked about the ship, the places they had seen, and those that still lay ahead of them. Imperceptibly, the conversation grew more personal. He's not at all what I imagined, thought Ivy. For she had vaguely supposed that Lawson was, like the people with whom his time was spent, loud and unrestrained, always ready to drink and to treat women with familiarity. Instead, she found him gentle and respectful and more ready to listen than to talk. In a little while, Ivy had told him a good deal about herself, of her life at the school in Yorkshire, then at the boarding house, and of the change in her fortunes. "And I've always wanted to travel," she admitted. "Whatever I settle down to later on, I shall have all this to remember." "I'm certain you were dead right to take your opportunity now, while you're young and can get the best out of it all," he said. She thrilled with exquisite delight in his approval. That night, in the cabin, Vera Lord was inclined to be critical of Ivy's new friendship. Naturally, she several times repeated, "It's nothing to do with me, but I must say I'm rather surprised at the way he suddenly elects to monopolize you, after ignoring your existence, practically. I suppose he's had some sort of quarrel with those noisy Bassett girls he's always running about with, and this is his way of getting back at them." Then she laughed a little. "That doesn't sound too complimentary to you, my dear, but of course you know I don't mean it like that." Ivy neither knew, nor did she care, in what way Vera Lord had meant her officious remarks. She wasn't thinking about Vera Lord. She was thinking that Mick Lawson, when he wasn't talking and laughing, had a look of sadness in his dark eyes. Someday, perhaps, he would tell her about himself and his life. 3. The day of Mick Lawson's confidences to Ivy Vernon came far sooner than she had ever, in her secret dreams, thought possible. 24 hours after they had danced together, they stood leaning over a low stone parapet, down which purple and rose-colored flowers cascaded in a riot of beauty. It was a hotel terrace, and the other members of the party had scattered after luncheon to go and look at the shops, or sit on the beach below and fall asleep in the hot sun. Lawson had stayed beside Ivy all the morning, ignoring everybody else. At luncheon, he took the place next hers. Ivy's sedate friends, the Maitlands, exchanged glances as he did so. She felt that they would expect her to join them as she always did, and wondered with agitation what she ought to do. "What are you going to do this afternoon?" Lawson asked, his voice oddly chiming with her thoughts. "I'm not sure. I don't know what the Maitlands have planned." She hesitated, and then spoke in a little rush of courage. "Shall you go and look at the museum?" "I believe that's what most people are doing." "I'm not frightfully keen on museums, I'm afraid," he drawled. "But you know what I really want, don't you?" "What?" "To stay with you, of course." Ivy was so much startled and confused and pleased that she was unable to make any answer at all. When the meal was over, she carefully avoided the eyes of the Maitlands and slipped out onto the terrace, as though to admire the view. The view, which was indeed a magnificent one, deserved very much more attention than she gave it. She was conscious of nothing at all until Lawson, a second or two later, joined her. "That was very sweet of you," he murmured. "Are you going to let me stay here with you?" "If you're sure you don't really want to go and explore the town," murmured Ivy. His only reply was to take hold of her very gently by the elbow and lead her to the far end of the terrace, where a small group of ilex trees concealed a stone bench and a little low stone parapet. It was dark and cool, and Ivy, with eyes aching from the glare, drew a long breath of mingled relief and excitement. Lawson was looking at her. "I think that frock of yours is too marvelous," he said boldly. "Blue's my favorite color." It was, of course, one of her new dresses, a thin flowered silk, sleeveless and square-necked. She had known a moment or two of doubt as to whether it was not really too young for her. But in her heart, she thought that she might still, easily enough, pass for 29 or 30. Certainly, it was true of her now. She seemed to have retraced her way into girlhood again as she and Mick Lawson sat together under the ilexes, all through the afternoon. Presently, in response to one or two timid questions, he began to tell her about himself. His mother, a beautiful Spanish dancer, had been deserted by her English husband within a year or two of their marriage. She had been left, with her baby, to struggle with fearful poverty alone in London. She was only 17. "Oh, poor thing," cried Ivy. "What did she do?" "She got engagements whenever she could, at music halls. She wouldn't part with her child, that was me, said Mick. Couldn't she have gone back to Spain? I suppose there wasn't enough money. No, there wasn't enough money. And you see, she was an orphan. She hadn't got any relations. How dreadful, how dreadful. What was her name? Her name? Oh, Dolores, he said hastily. La Belle Dolores, they called her. When I was 6 years old, she died. And what happened to you? I was sent to an orphanage. There was nowhere else I could go, nobody to look after me. It was a ghastly childhood, although the orphanage was a decent place enough, as institutions go. But you see, I could remember my mother, and I knew she'd told me that my father was an English officer. I knew that I was different from the other kids. Yes, yes, breathed Ivy, her eyes full of tears. He drew a deep breath and then relaxed, slumping in long, slim grace beside her on the stone bench. Then he told her a great deal more. How he had run away from the orphanage and been brought back again and beaten, and then a job had been found for him in a big commercial hotel, and he had worked very hard. You know something about hotel life, only, of course, from the other end of the scales, he said. Ivy nodded. She told him some of her experiences, and they were strangely paralleled by his own. Very soon, however, Ivy stopped talking. She wanted to hear more about Mick. At 16, he had been taken up by a very rich old couple. He was, by this time, working as assistant porter, and the old lady had taken a fancy to him and wanted to have him trained as a chauffeur. I agreed, of course, he said, with a short laugh that seemed to Ivy full of bitterness. It was a chance of getting into the world to which I really, by birth, belonged. Tour world, he added deferentially. But I'm not, she began confusedly, not quite certain what she intended to say. He silenced her with a gesture and a smile that showed his beautiful white teeth. Then he went on to tell her of the years between his 16th and his 20th birthdays. The rich couple had been kind to him, and he had served them faithfully. On the death of the old gentleman, the widow had gone to live in the south of France, taking with her the big car and the chauffeur. She became more and more dependent on him and treated him as a friend rather than as a servant. I got the chance of mixing with decent people from time to time, he said simply. I tried to improve myself, to speak properly, and to learn French. How wonderful he was, thought Ivy, and the thought was reflected in the soft, faded face, with its incongruously naive expression, upturned to his. Eventually, Lawson's employer had died, leaving him everything she possessed in the world. And the will had been disputed by her relations, nephews and nieces, for she had no children on the grounds of undue influence and the alleged senility of the testatrix. How wicked, how wicked. Did you lose? Cried Ivy, but already she knew the answer. He had lost. He had nothing, excepting presents of money that the old woman had given him in her lifetime. What did you do? He had gone to Nice and made a desperate bid for fortune at Monte Carlo. Ivy's eyes grew enormous. Gambling. Of course, you didn't win, she murmured wisely. Was it not well known that nobody can really win at Monte Carlo? If by some fluke they did, then they couldn't ever resist going on playing, and the bank got all their money in the end. Lawson shrugged his shoulders. I won and I lost, he declared. But on the whole I won more than I lost. All the time, I was on the lookout for another job. Eventually, he had found another job. A French hotel manager wanted a reception clerk who could speak English. Lawson stayed with him 7 months. The story went on, more and more romantic, in spite of the fact that it was sordid as well. For Lawson admitted frankly that he had often been without means, without work, almost without hope. He implied, rather than actually admitted, that he had spent money, when he had any, on women, and that from time to time he had gambled. There seemed nothing to keep straight for, he said wistfully. Nobody really cared what became of me. He gave her a curious, sidelong look as he spoke. If I'd known, he began softly, and then checked himself. Ivy looked down and twisted her handkerchief between her fingers. She longed to know what he had been going to say. Instead of finishing that broken sentence, Lawson went on to tell her that he had, 2 years ago, fallen in with a man and his wife with whom he had eventually gone to lodge. The wife was English, the man Italian. He drank and used to knock his wife about, said Lawson. I stood up for her as much as I could. Many's the row I've had with that Dago chap. I'll tell you some day. But the long and the short of it was that one day he cleared out, leaving nothing in the house and owing money all over the place. The wife, gasped Ivy. Oh, he left her. Stranded. She hadn't a bean. What happened to her? Gravely said Ivy, feeling that she knew the answer already. I paid her fare home to London, said Lawson. She had known it. It brought me luck, perhaps. I was down to my last 40 francs, and then I picked up an old English newspaper outside a cafe. And the first thing I saw was an advertisement, asking me to get into touch with a firm of London solicitors. You know the kind of thing. Something to his advantage. Yes, yes. She'd often seen such notices, and sometimes wondered what story lay behind them. I couldn't afford to go to England, of course, but I wrote. I was the man they were looking for. My father had died and left me everything. Oh, it's like a book, cried Ivy. And is everything all right now? It will be. Of course, the moment they were satisfied of my identity, they made no difficulty about advancing me a sum of money. I went to London and saw them, and looked into everything. It's a nice estate, a house in the country, and about £20,000. There's a good deal of business to be settled up before I can actually get hold of it all, but the lawyers are seeing to it. And meanwhile, I came on this cruise. He looked full into her eyes. At first, I wished I hadn't come. I didn't care about it, or about the people. Now, I know it was the luckiest thing I ever did. For it scarcely surprised Ivy that her new friend, at the end of their long afternoon together, should tell her that to nobody else had he ever related his life story. It was for her alone. Ivy earnestly promised him that with her his confidence should be safe. She felt how well she could understand his wish for secrecy. The sole happening in her own life, the legacy that had proved so much larger than she had ever expected, she had not spoken of to anybody. The Maitlands knew, but nobody else did. Ivy had often wondered whether her fellow travelers thought of her as a young woman who had always been well off, and in a position to travel if she wanted to do so. If she hadn't had the idea of going on a cruise, if the agency hadn't recommended this particular trip, if she hadn't said yes the night that Mick had asked her to dance. These speculations sometimes crossed the mind of Ivy in the next day or two, but for the most part she lived and moved in a kind of rose-colored haze that seemed not to admit of coherent thought. Then came a sudden jolt. Very kindly, and with obviously genuine regret, Mrs. Maitland spoke to her. Did Ivy realize, she said, that this Mr. Lawson was not really a very desirable young man? Mr. Maitland, a most experienced judge of human nature, my dear, was definitely of the opinion that he was a mere adventurer. It was he who had begged his wife to give Ivy a word of warning. It's very kind of you, said Ivy, trembling a little. I know you mean it for my good. But you're quite mistaken. You see, I know all about Mr. Lawson. How? He's told me all about himself, said Ivy. But my dear, silly woman, that doesn't mean anything at all. Of course he's told you about himself, but what proof have you got that he's told you the truth? What proof have you got that he hasn't? Retorted Ivy with spirit. Neither my husband nor I care for the look of him. And surely you remember that at first you didn't either. When he was always drinking and flirting with those dreadful Bassett girls. I know all about that. He's explained it all to me. It was just that he hadn't yet got to know any of the nice people on board. Ivy, I hate saying this, but my husband and I both feel you ought to know. Lawson didn't come near you till that night he asked you to dance, did he? That was the first time he spoke to me, Ivy admitted guardedly. That afternoon, in the smoking room, someone had mentioned your name. Don happened to be there. They said you'd just come into a fortune. You know how absurdly these things get exaggerated. Some ridiculous figure was mentioned. Lawson was there. What difference does it make? Ivy asked defiantly. Oh, my dear, how difficult you're making it. Don't you really understand that, to a man of the kind we believe Lawson to be, any unprotected woman with money is fair game? Then let me tell you, said Ivy, to show you how absolutely wrong you are, that he's got a lot of money himself. A lot of money and a house in England. Who says so? Lawson himself. I thought so. Have you got any proof whatever that he's telling you the truth? I don't need it, said Ivy, coloring deeply. I can trust his word. After that, She saw much less of the Maitlands. There was no quarrel, but Ivy avoided them. She spent all her time with Mick Lawson, who soon began to make love to her. Ivy could scarcely believe in her own happiness. He had not yet asked her to marry him, but she felt certain that he would, and knew that she was going to accept him. It was like a dream, she told herself, and she wanted the dream voyage never to end. But one evening, as the ship was nearing Marseilles, the quality of the dream altered. Mick had been preoccupied all day. At last, Ivy asked what was the matter. With much reluctance, he told her. A radio message received that morning had informed him that there was a hitch in the settlement of his father's affairs. Nothing at all serious, some temporary formality to be adjusted by the lawyers, but he would not be entering into his inheritance quite as soon as he had expected. That was all. It would make it a little bit awkward for a few months, perhaps, but that was all. Won't the lawyers advance you what you want? Yes, I'm sure they will directly I get to England. It's just that for the moment, but I'm not going to worry you with my affairs, Ivy. Forget it. Ivy didn't forget it. There was a preoccupation about Mick's manner that made it impossible. Over and over again, she asked herself whether he would be offended if she offered to lend him money, just till they got to England. At last she did it, trembling a good deal. As she had feared, Mick refused to touch it, saying that he would never have told her anything about it if he'd thought she would make such a suggestion. Had she lost him by her tactlessness? Ivy had difficulty in restraining her tears. Then, suddenly, Mick relented. He would borrow £50 if it would make her happier. He was a brute to have distressed her. Of course it was all right and sweet and generous of her. It was only that the idea of borrowing money from a woman. Ivy laughed happily. That's quite out of date, she declared gaily. Don't you know that we've dropped those stupid conventions nowadays? A man and a woman can be friends, just like two men. Can they? Said Mick Lawson. He took her in his arms and kissed her. Ivy, trembling with happiness, wondered when he would ask her to marry him. The words of Mrs. Maitland were as though they had never been spoken. Then Vera Lord, Ivy's cabin companion, spoke. She was much more outspoken than the older woman had been, and she and Ivy quarreled seriously. I know he's making love to you, said Vera Lord. Not that that matters. I'm as broad-minded as anybody, I should hope. But I do hate to feel you're taking it all seriously. Why, the man's nothing but a common adventurer. It was not in Ivy's nature to tell Miss Lord to mind her own business. But she did, with courage, bear testimony to the faith that was in her. I know his story. He's told it to me himself. And we're friends, and I trust him. I dare say it sounds very stupid and sentimental, but I've always believed that friendship means a lot. It doesn't matter to me what anybody says about him, I just know I can trust him. In her heart, she repeated the formula of her school days. I believe in love. The cruise came to an end. Those who had traveled together went their several ways and, for the most part, in spite of exchanging addresses and promises of writing, never saw one another again. The Maitlands said goodbye to Ivy with a mingling of severity and compassion. They were good-hearted people, and they liked her and were very sorry for her. They saw her, looking radiant, leaving the train at Victoria Station. Mick Lawson, his hat over one eye, was with her. 5. Ivy married Mick Lawson, and in the course of the next 2 years she learned a great many things. She learned that he frequently drank too much, that he made love to other women, and that most of the things he had told her about himself and his life were untrue. He had all her money and spent it on himself and his women. They led a wandering, incredible kind of existence, without any home, drifting from one place to another. Ivy had to realize that the estate and the fortune of which he had spoken would never materialize. They had never existed. He was not unkind to her, and Ivy remained helplessly in love with him. Always, she hoped that by giving him more and more, and sacrificing herself to him in every way, she would bring him back to what he had seemed in the beginning. The time came when Mick demanded her last reserve of money. The capital left by Aunt May had gone, bit by bit, so had her own tiny savings, and there was nothing left but the sum of £1,000 at Ivy's bank. But I can't, she said, nearly crying. You know what they said when I sold out all the investments. This is all we have left to live on. I know. That's why I want it. I want to put it into something better that will bring you in a bigger return, said Mick. Ivy didn't believe him. She could not. He tried bullying her, pleading with her, making love to her. Everything failed. Then Mick said, "Very well. Then we'll use it to ensure my life. If anything happens to me, you'll be provided for." At that, Ivy was touched and startled. She sobbed and cried, promising him the money. He did love her, after all, she thought. Her mind refused to admit the possibility that he did not. She knew that some women were married for their money, that there were rogues and cheats and liars in the world. But she could never believe that these things were true of herself or of Mick, whom she loved. After she had given him the £1,000, he brought her some papers to read. "It's about the insurance," he said. Ivy looked obediently at the papers. They did not convey very much to her. "And I've got a piece of news for you," said Lawson gaily. "I think I've heard of a job. They want a reception clerk at the Montevideo at Brighton, and a man I know thinks he can get me in. I'm going down there today. Let me come with you." "No," he said with finality. "I'll give you a telephone ring tonight." He looked at her, and there was something in his expression that Ivy had not seen there for a long while. Things are coming right, she thought wildly. "Do let me come too," she begged. "It's so horrid here." They were in cheap lodgings in North London. "If this comes off," declared Lawson, "we'll clear out at once and go into a decent place in Brighton." "Why, they may take me in at once. If so, you can come down tomorrow. Could you give me some money before you go, to pay the landlady?" she half whispered. Mick hesitated, then he took out of his wallet 3 new pound notes and gave them to her. Ivy did not ask where they had come from, although she knew that on the previous day he had had no money at all. She had learnt not to ask questions. "Goodbye, old girl," said Mick. "Goodbye, my darling." She lifted her face, and he kissed her. "Goodbye, old girl," he repeated. There was a sound of real regret in his voice. Ivy watched him from the window as he went off, his hat at its characteristic angle, over one eye. As she watched him go, she thought of nothing but that he did, after all, love her. She was sure of it, could never doubt it. For she believed in love. That evening and all the next day, she waited for Mick's telephone ring. But it never came. Nor did she ever see him again. The lawyer who had once dealt with Aunt May's estate did what he could for his client. Eventually, he even found work for her at her old trade, in the hotel business. But now, of course, she was not assistant manageress, but only housekeeper. The lawyer ever afterwards quoted her as the classic example in all his experience of the folly of women. The fellow was never seen again. Of course the scoundrel never went near Brighton, just cleared out, with her £1,000. We made all inquiries, and there's reason to suppose that she wasn't even legally married to him. He'd most likely got a wife already in the south of France somewhere. Yet that fool of a woman, Ivy Vernon, sticks to it that the fellow really cared for her. "What's happened to her?" one asked. "Nothing. She just goes on working. Lucky for her that she can." And I suppose, the lawyer cackled, that she still believes in him. If ever there was a fool of a woman. Ivy, working hard for her living, prayed every night that a letter from Mick might come next day. He couldn't be dead, she thought, because if he were, she would have heard from the insurance company. Nothing the lawyer could say would shake her on this point. On it rested her conviction that Mick had really loved her all the time, had thought of her welfare. His infidelity, his extortions, his lies, his desertion flayed her spirit and, in the classic and inaccurate phrase, broke her heart. Only one thing could enable her essential self to survive, and, like some strange natural phenomenon left untouched by a tidal wave that has destroyed everything else, Ivy's belief held, in defiance of proven facts. We believe what we want to believe.